Good morning and welcome to the day 2 of the EMCSA conference 2021. I'm joined in studio by Divan Mudli. Divan,
good morning, everyone.
How did you find day 1 went for you?
Oh, it was brilliant. I think it was the perfect foundation for what we're going to talk about today. We had the right speakers, the right caliber, the right companies represented. In my opinion, we are slightly behind the curve, but it's not too late. There's much to be done, but I think if we start the talking now, we can absolutely catch up in time. We've got the right public, the right public-private partnerships that can still be achieved. So it looks very good, and it looks good for the future. We're not going to have thousands of EVs on the roads in the next year. We've got plenty of time to build up the infrastructure. We've got plenty of time to get ready. And in my opinion, looking forward, we now look to local manufacturing. We look to start talking EV. We start talking it up. We start getting people ready that it is the future and it is coming.
Fantastic. So let's quickly just recap day 1 for those people who weren't with us on day 1. So day 1, we were joined by a host of speakers, most of them focusing on where South Africa is now currently in the EV space. Mm-hmm. So what we had is we had Anami Fanamava from Green Cab talking about the opportunities for primarily a woman in the green economy to join in, and the opportunities for e-hailing vehicles. We then had Mr. Dale Chapman from Eskom in the hot seat. I found that conversation really interesting in that he was open and honest about where Eskom is.
Yes.
But I think he was also pragmatic in the approach. And just like you said, we're not suddenly going to wake up tomorrow and have 5,000 EVs on the South African roads.
Yes.
We're not there yet.
Yeah.
So everyone saying, "Oh, I'm not going to buy an EV because load shedding and this and that." Eskom is cognizant of the challenges that they face. They're also open to public-private partnerships.
Yep.
And their intent is to focus on what they do, which is provide power to the grid and make the grid stable. Yep. So I found that very refreshing that I found it a very pragmatic, very open and honest conversation, not sensational like we often read in the news, and it was to the point. And I think it was a honest assessment of where we were. Yeah. Then we moved into, I think, 2 very interesting speakers, the Buerta brothers, De Villiers and Yaku from Solar F and Grid Cars. And Yaku gave us an insight into what the future grid could look like. And I think that was really amazing, and that he kind of painted a picture for us where we could very quickly solve some of the energy problems that we have in South Africa in light of EVs coming, and that EVs can actually even present opportunities to help stabilize the grid in terms of flattening out that energy curve that they talk about, and charging EVs in off-peak hours. But the message that started to come through from both of them was that there does need to be some sort of lifestyle change. We all need to accept that the change is coming. And then move on from there. And then I know we got on to Pat Wheeler from Professor Pat Wheeler from Nottingham. And I know you really enjoyed that talk.
Definitely.
What are some takeaways from what Pat shared with us for yesterday from yourself?
For me, it's having crazy mad scientists that are now applying themselves in an area that we have a vested interest in. And it's not just about rocket ships anymore. It's about these EVs. It's about having these great minds, and they're going racing, and they're pushing the limits all the time. And all that means is a better product in the future. In my opinion, that's the kind of skills that we need to transfer to South Africa. We've got a strong automotive manufacturing sector here that needs our support, that needs to start building and producing these cars. We can't fall behind Africa. Africa's already taken a step forward. We need to catch up. We need to protect this industry. We need to protect our jobs. We can do it. There's still time.
Sure. Yeah. And then I think we wrapped up day 1 with a very interesting conversation from Anzette du Plessis of Proof Communications. And basically she took the whole picture of where we are at the moment, and I think summarized it. And I think before we get into day 2, it's going to be important that we understand, that maybe the people out there understand, is that currently where we are in South Africa, and this is maybe my assumption, maybe I'm paraphrasing a lot of our speakers, is that the overriding thing that many of them said is that South Africans are ready for EVs.
Yes.
First point. Second point is we do need interaction and work with government, either in terms of creating incentives, tax breaks. There has to be some sort of legislation that's coming from government sides to encourage people to move across to EVs.
Yes, yes.
And I believe that that was every single speaker touched on that topic at some point.
Yes.
So it's obviously a critical thing, and we're saying that as an industry, we know that there's many industry bodies out there, but hopefully someone can start getting it right, because that seems to be the bottleneck at the moment.
Yes.
We've got a lot of EVs out there in the world, and unfortunately the only EVs that are getting here to South Africa are premium high-end luxury vehicles.
Yes.
Which then limits the amount of people that can afford those vehicles.
Yes.
And I think that that's what Anzette touched on, is that when she commented on what was the one thing she would change in South Africa, it was obviously legislation, but then having more models and vehicles available on the showroom floors that appeal to a broader spectrum of buyers.
Yes.
And then that way we can have more people adopting EVs and more people using them in day-to-day life. And I think that that was a great summary of where we stand at the moment. And the summary from my point of view would be this. One, our grid is needing some work, but Eskom, with people like SolarF, are working on public-private partnerships to get us to the grid of the future. Yes, it's not going to happen overnight. We're not going to wake up tomorrow and suddenly have a stable grid, but we have the time to get there.
Yeah.
The second thing, government, and we need legislation, incentives, tax breaks, maybe even local manufacturing.
Oh, that's a must. That's a must.
We must go down that road. Something has to change.
Absolutely.
And then finally, from your side and in the OEM brand side,
local production is key. That's where the profit is.
Sure.
And all the local OEMs know it. So we can't be importing cars built in other parts of the world with all the import duties and taxes and expect those cars to sell locally and compete against the ICE cars. So somehow we have to reskill, reset, so to speak. Cars have their own life cycle, usually 7 years. So therefore, as we get to the next generation, so this is going to happen over the next 7 years, where we upskill, we get to a point where our current local OEMs can produce and export. That's the key for me. And over and above that, these incentives, be it import taxes, whatever it is, these smart guys know what to do, make these cars more affordable. We can't have cars only sitting at the 1 million rand price bracket and expect mass adoption. So it's going to have to be a planned response from our side, and we need to get there step by step. But I think we've now got the right people talking. And once you see the list of speakers today, I think everyone's going to get excited about what they're going to listen to.
Fantastic.
And as we go through.
So now you I think that's summed up. That's day one. So we have a number of people, participants. We have people tuning in on our YouTube link, on Facebook. Number of people coming through have actually registered through Zoom. And what we need to do is we encourage, I should say, is to have those people interact with us. So if you have registered and you're on our Zoom link, please feel free to send through any questions throughout the whole day. Our team is monitoring the questions. We will try and get your question answered as much as possible. However, other participants and experts are also here, so they will also be able to answer your question for you. So what we saw yesterday was actually participants answering other participants' questions, which is really cool to see, because it's people answering each other's questions. Secondly, if you want to interact with us on Facebook or YouTube, we're live on YouTube today as well. Go in there, get a comment going. Our team again is monitoring those, and we'll try and get your comments to the speakers as much as we can to also get those questions asked. I think we had some really cool interactions yesterday. We had some nice questions coming through, a mix of people who obviously are the converted, EV guys who know what EVs are about, asking very pressing, direct questions. But then we also had some interesting questions from, I think, the people who are most important, people who don't know about EVs, and they're asking basic questions. And the one that stuck with me was we had a question from a gentleman who was in the rural East London, or rural Eastern Cape, I should say, not East London. And he was saying, how's EVs going to happen? What's happening for rural EVs? We don't have the infrastructure. And I think 2 or 3 of our speakers actually touched on that point, that there's options.
There's options.
And I don't know about you, Devan, but I felt that's where we need to get to. We need to stop preaching to the converted and start preaching to the people who don't know.
Exactly. For those that don't know, they don't know how to plug it in. They don't know about slow charges and fast charges and solar panels, etc. And somehow there needs to be an education process. And I think it all starts here. And so what a great conference, and what a great way to start.
Fantastic. So let's just quickly, a couple of comments that we had yesterday. I think it's because we're in the industry. So when we talk ICE, What's ICE?
Internal combustion engine.
So that's the engine you know now.
As you know, petrol or diesel. And those that know say the secret why the old OEMs did so well and were in business is because they knew how to build an ICE engine.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone can build a car. There's seats, there's bodywork, etc. But it's only the guys that knew how to build an engine that could produce and sell a car. Now with batteries, the door is open. Anyone can come into the game. Anyone that wants to build a car that can stick a battery into something that we define as a car can get into the market. So it's a new language, so to speak.
Fantastic. So and when we say EVs, what are we talking about when it comes to EVs? Because I know the range is very broad, I should say. We're not just talking cars, are we?
No.
So what are we talking EVs? You can sum it up for us.
Electric mobility.
Electric mobility.
Skateboards, bicycles, motorbikes, cars, bakkies, trucks, boats, helicopters, planes.
Okay. And would you say anything that runs with a pure electric drivetrain? Is that what we're getting down to? Is that the drivetrain of these vehicles, where they're scooters, bikes, whatever, is an electric drivetrain?
Exactly. We are now talking mobility. Okay. Last mile, first mile, whatever it is, we need to move from place to place. And how do we do it? And that vehicle is an EV.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do we... obviously these vehicles, for the layman out there, these vehicles are powered by batteries.
Yes.
Batteries store energy, as we term it, energy or electricity.
Yes.
And those batteries drive the electric drivetrain.
Yes.
Now, do we bring hybrids into this mix?
Oh, yes.
Or hybrids kind of something in between ICE and what we would call a pure electric vehicle?
Yes, absolutely. So that's a great question.
Yes.
So I think hybrids are the transition vehicles.
Okay.
So it's a mixture of the two. So you've got a petrol engine or a diesel engine and a battery. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a perfect way as we transition, because till we have an infrastructure, we still have range issues, etc. But someone still wants to feel green. They still want to run with a active hybrid car, but they say, I've got 30 kilometers of battery power.
Yeah.
And I can go to work and charge at work and get back home.
Okay.
So theoretically, I'm still clean. I'm green. But if I do need to do the long trip, I've got a petrol engine to take me through. But ultimately, that's not the way we get to zero emissions transportation.
100%.
We have to go to complete EV, which is BEV, battery electric vehicle,
yep.
And that will come as the next step. But hybrids are a perfect transition phase.
Fantastic. Yeah. So we're going to jump into day two. We got in our morning session, we got two great speakers. We're joined by Mr. Chris Selwood, AM, all the way from Australia. He's the director of the Bridgestone World Solar Challenge, and he's going to be talking to us about the future of mobility. So now we're going to be looking into the crystal ball. What do we see coming in the next 5 to 10 years? And then just after 10 o'clock, we're joined by Nhlanhla Mazibuko, and he's the founder of Mazibuko Motor Company, and he's got something very, very exciting to launch with us. And I think it's going to be exciting. If people want to tune in, that's one that they mustn't miss. Then we go through a tea break. Very quickly after that, we have Tiaan Oosthuizen and Johannes de Vries from TUT talking about a prototype solar electric vehicles in South Africa. Then we're followed by Cleisha Johnson, who's the manager for electromobility and on-demand mobility solutions for BMW South Africa. After her, we are joined with Gaylor Montmas-Sinclair, and he's talking around expanding policy options to support EV value chain. So I think that he's going to touch on some big things that we heard yesterday: incentives, tax. What policy needs to change. We go through a lunch break. After lunch, we come back with our two closing speakers, two what I would call real heavyweights. Robert Kuchen, all the way again from Australia, talking about the environmental impact of low and zero emission vehicles, because there is still an environmental impact of these vehicles. Yeah. So I think we need to understand that we can't think, because I'm driving now a zero emission vehicle, I'm having no impact on the environment. Yes. You still are having an impact, but what is that impact and how do we manage that impact? And then we close with Frederick John, who I know is a good friend of yours, yes. And he's a senior consultant from Neckerman Strategic Advisors. And he's talking about why we need smart cities and the city of the future. So what could Johannesburg, Pretoria, Cape Town, Durban, what could it look like in 10 to 15 years' time? And I think that's key as we look towards the future. Yeah. So I don't know about you, but I'm super excited for day two.
Super excited.
Brilliant. Let's go. So no further delay from myself and Devan in studio. I believe our first speaker, Mr. Chris Selwood, is with us all the way from Australia. Chris, are you there, sir?
Good morning to you, Rob. Good morning, Devan.
Fantastic. Nice to chat to you this morning. Thank you for taking some time out. I know it's late afternoon there in Australia, so thank you for taking the time out. And yeah, over to you. So let's take it away.
Thank you very much, Rob. Well, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, everybody. My name's Chris Selwood, as Rob introduced, and it's my task to put the Australian perspective of the global context in this space. And I hope to perhaps touch on some conversation starters or heads up. Some things might sound a bit pessimistic, but really they are there to trigger our thoughts and to focus our attention on some of the issues that we've identified. So let me start with the statement that anybody who says they can predict the future cannot surely be trusted and must be treated with the greatest suspicion. So on that basis, Rob and his organisation has given me the mission impossible by asking me to predict what I think the mobility sector is going to look like in the future. Some things are, of course, certain, apart from death and taxes, that's a given. But of all the creatures that inhabit this lovely planet, mankind will continue to travel, and our desire, indeed our need for mobility, whether it be for business or pleasure, will only grow. And that presents a huge range of possibilities for everybody interested in this subject. The other certainty is that of change, because while we have been used to evolutionary change, history shows that the biggest driver of changes to the way we do things comes from the unplanned disruption forcing us out of our comfort zones. And dare I say, many of us are currently experiencing quite a disruptive change right now. Indeed, I'm presenting this paper from my studio here in Australia rather than a conference room in South Africa, and that in itself denies me the opportunity of enjoying your company and your country, particularly in the less formal environs of the conference precinct. My other difficulty is the subject matter, because what will the future bring in mobility around the world? In the context of the overall conference, perhaps we can narrow that down to changes in which we get around. Mobility in general, urban mobility in particular, the cars we drive and the fuels that power them. And the 2020s will undoubtedly be a decade of transformation in urban mobility. But will it be the decade of fully electric cars, the BEVs? We're living in an area of change, unprecedented change, and new technology is being developed and existing ones are becoming obsolete at a dizzying rate. And the convergence of forces such as blockchain technologies, Internet of Things, mobile computing, each significant on its own, will surely have a cumulative effect that I don't think we've yet to comprehend. But again, if we take a reference and context from the title of our conference, I'll try and address my view of the mobility landscape and the emerging trends and the opportunities that right now seem reasonable to anticipate. The one common factor in this highly complex subject is energy, and what we do, what we are able to do, will certainly depend on the energy profile available to us in the coming years. And this has become a recurring theme in the research that I've done in preparation for this presentation. My working life has been provided me with the opportunity to travel far and wide, often well away from the tourist routes. And I've been able to meet with peoples of different cultures and backgrounds. Truth is, as human beings, we are all people with the same hopes and fears, and importantly in this context, the need for mobility to go about our daily business. What we learn from this is that solutions to these needs are not a one-size-fits-all scenario. The journalists always seem to talk of progress, and they always talk of that as a good thing. But as we said, change is inevitable, but is that the same as progress? So let's start with the need for mobility. Certainly as far as terrestrial mobility is concerned, there's been little change for decades in the way people travel, and certainly in the Western world in the urban population, that invariably means commuting to work. Urban life is bombarded by a potent mixture of social, economic and technological change and challenges, each of which have separate and conjoined effects on the way we do things. Every aspect of our lives is impacted, and mobility is undergoing one of the most transformation of all. And I venture to suggest that for many people around the world, physical improvements to their local road networks may have a far greater impact on their mobility needs than all the new technology put together. And for many, the barrier to mobility can be as simple, as if such things ever can be simple, as political rather than physical. So perhaps we should start with something we can understand: personal motor vehicle ownership. Traditionally, mobility has been based on the notion of individual car ownership, and changes to that model, which has steadily grown over the last 100 years or so, are already appearing on the horizon. It's evident that, in the Western world at least, today's teenagers are not driven by the same passions that we once were, not on any level. Certainly in terms of mobility, they have a very different outlook on life, and my own grandchildren, now of driving age and city dwellers at university, appear to have little interest in motor car ownership or developing their own driving skills. In the Eastern world, people of our generation rarely had the opportunity for their own personal vehicle ownership, meaning that their young people, again, have a very different outlook. The model of travelling to work, of commuting, is changing with people working from home. And architects around the globe are working to reinvent intercity lifestyles, once seen as not the preferred option, but now as a desirable proposition where people don't need to travel anywhere. They live, work and play within a radius of 1 kilometre or 2. Some figures show private vehicle ownership is already in decline. So the question that must be put is, have we reached peak car? And in looking at the next 10 years, what is our baseline? Where are we now with the electric vehicles on the global manufacturing scale? And a question for you listening. What do you think now is the percentage of new cars being produced that are electric? What do we think? 15, 20, 30%? Certainly we are told that 50% of new registrations in China are of electric cars. But that doesn't really answer the question. In fact, this may be an example of the smoke and mirrors of the media. 50% of new EVs is a great number, but the International Energy Agency's annual publication, Global EV Outlook, tells us actually it's 5% of the Chinese vehicle production that is electric vehicles. But that itself is twice the global figure, which the IEA report last year is 2.5%. But you're doing very well in your country, I see, and you spoke about that yesterday. And I see the market plans to bring you lots of new models with exciting developments like the Mini E and the Audi e-tron and new Leaf variants leading the way. So figures have huge potential for growth over the next 10 years. And these can be driven by government incentives, falling prices, growing infrastructure, all resulting in growing consumer confidence. EV take-up is certainly gathering momentum everywhere the markets are opening up. And the key barriers to societal and behavioural changes are being steadily eroded, all of which shows that the market will grow exponentially as it matures. In terms of vehicle ownership, beyond the societal changes mentioned earlier, there are some key determinants that I've identified. The first of these is true cost of ownership. And that in some ways is the dark side of prices skewed by government subsidies and incentives. The actual running costs. People are scared about the running costs of EVs, their charging regimes, the conventional fuel comparisons on a per kilometre basis, and the unknown costs of service maintenance and repair schedules, particularly regard to battery life cycles. And it's gratifying to see companies like Toyota offering 10-year warranties on batteries on vehicles like the RAV4 EV. And lastly, the poor residual values that we're starting to see in the EV market. And these are due to falling costs of new models, concerned over battery replacements, and the uncertainty of new models coming out at reduced prices, subsidized prices. And of course, on the flip side is the social media driven technological hype of FOMO, fear of missing out, because if you don't have the latest technology, then you can't be cool. But there appears to be a distinct reluctance for users to get to grips with a firm understanding of energy management and things like smart chargers, vehicle to grid, energy trading, and all of those things that people are going to have to change their mindset with their motoring habits. EV infrastructure is certainly growing, and there are huge opportunities here, and I think we'll see anxieties decrease as these markets mature. And as I've always said, political will is needed to accelerate these changes. And this is now manifest with the announcement of bans on ICE, internal combustion engines, by many governments around the developed world. Manufacturers have little option but to respond and adapt with significant investments in EV technology. So much so that McKinsey market analysts predict that EVs could account for 69% of passenger car sales by 2030. Everybody in the industry is talking about it. But are EVs really taking over the world? Certainly in certain markets, they are growing in quite an aggressive rate. But as I said just now, these EV take-ups refer to our own reality, the reality of the Western world with developed economies. And when manufacturers say they're not going to build any more ICEs, one has to wonder whose market segment they are addressing, because it may be some time before the EV industry reaches the maturity of total replacement. Let's not forget the great precedents of redundant plant being redeployed in developing countries. You may recall the Volkswagen Beetle was still rolling off the line in Brazil in the mid-1980s. And the old British Morris Oxford, in its guise as the Hindustan ambassador, only ceased production in India within the last 10 years. Ford's Dagenham plant in the UK has recently been retooled to put over 1 million diesel engines a year into the global market. And General Motors itself builds hundreds of thousands of conventional engines in the 1200, 1500 cc size range in Uzbekistan, all of them destined for emerging economies. And there's many other plants around the world that feed that hunger for new cars, which is soon to be measured at over 100 million units a year. But here in our Western countries, e-mobility is certainly one of those things that has captured the public imagination. And that, in turn, is fueled by the current climate of media hungry for content and success measured by the time eyes are spent on their pages. And just like the hype around my Global Green Challenge event itself 10 years ago, the marketeers and publicists continue to create their own view of reality, resulting in an urban mobility landscape that is arguably, or certainly can be, a mixture of spin, wishful thinking, and reality. So what might new movement in cities actually look like? What are the trends that are informing the future? I contend they are a combination of shared, connected, electrified, and autonomous mobility. Vehicles that are already disrupting the urban mobility landscape. Car sharing. A lot gets talked about that, but when we look at the Frankfurt experience, we see that that's losing a little bit of its shine already, because the German experience shows that the business case of car sharing is not really working out as they'd anticipated. To start with, just 5% of the population live in a city centre with a population density sufficiently great to support car sharing. And that's not a good business model to be starting with. Touted as a cheap form of transport with high convenience, cars need to be available close by and at short notice. And experience is showing that growth in the customer base is diluting these attributes to the detriment of the whole scheme. In addition, using car share at the expense of public transport was never an intended outcome. Economically, urban mobility is impacted by the gig economy, where ride sharing, deliveries on demand, mobility as a service, and contactless payments combine to bring convenience in moving around in a revolution, no pun intended, that is yet to involve the wheels that carry us. Technology is the biggest driver of these changes. In today's modern world, most of us have the luxury of a level of information connectivity in our pocket that could only be dreamt of not that long ago. It's a sobering thought to realize that the first iPhone was released in 2007, and an awful lot of metaphorical water has gone under the bridge since then. Technology allows us to know where our high-frequency public transport is, how long we can expect to wait for our ride share, and in extreme circumstances, even order Uber Eats while we are waiting. Electrification is the common factor, and undoubtedly at the top of the automotive wish list, electric cars are great. And I'm sure we all agree, but it's sad that some jurisdictions are starting to require soundscapes to be broadcast from the vehicle, much akin to the man with the red safety flag who had to walk in front of the early automobiles. We are told that the rise of connected and autonomous vehicles is set to revolutionize global transport by fundamentally altering the way people and goods are moved around. Again, the media gets very excited by this, but I don't see the legislators keeping up. And while the appetite for autonomy may be strong in some sectors of the market, two things I feel are very much underreported. Firstly, a sound and secure operating environment will require a great deal of upgrades to existing infrastructure. Those of us who enjoy level 1 autonomy, a feature of which is automatic steering, know what happens when the white line on the road suddenly disappears. And those who have played with level 3 autonomy find well-meaning signage such as advanced speed limit signs get misread and misacted upon. And that can be problematic on a 100-kilometre road where a 50k speed limit refers to the upcoming side roads. Those who write the codes need to understand the diverse markets in which their vehicles will operate. In Australia's Northern Territory, it's common to have 130 km/h speed limits, which my car doesn't even recognise. And back to the energy issue again, energy itself is underreported, and the power requirements for vehicle autonomy are underplayed. Control systems themselves are said to embrace over 100 million lines of code, more than 3 times that of the space shuttle. Artificial neural networks required to process gigabytes of data every second. The computer power to do that is huge and hungry, and nobody talks about that or the redundancy that would double that effort. Increasingly connected cars will evolve to become computers on wheels and will generate more data than ever before. And it should be recognized that this scale of connectivity will also have implications in other places, even to the extent of questions around cybersecurity that will need to be addressed in the coming decade. Finally, the idea that autonomous vehicles will free up space used for car parks in cities certainly avoids the question of recharging and downtime. Nevertheless, it may well lead to more affordable, on-demand mobility services as businesses, if they are to survive, learn to be agile and adapt to emerging and converging markets and respond to the disruption of those in decline. Because nothing, if it ever was, is forever. anymore. New entrants and startups are challenging the incumbents, who in turn look to leverage their experience and resources to build sustainable market positions that they hope will last their lifetime. I doubt that they will. In terms of mobility systems, the status quo is expensive, accident-prone and inefficient. So many opportunities for change. But are the promises of convenient, safe and economic mobility with less impact to health and the environment realistic? Certainly the prospect of connected, automated vehicles, distance travelled as a commodity, and even flying cars are the subject of a great deal of research, investment, and indeed media interest. And talking of flying cars, Gideon Litchfield of the MIT Technology Review reports that up to 20 small airborne vehicles might come to market in the coming few years. The timelines are aggressive, and some may be more realistic than others. The World Economic Forum in Davos was recently told that battery technology is on the verge of making electrically powered flight feasible. Further research suggests that powered flight requires a similar energy input as a large truck, and that in itself may preclude flights of any length, but short hops might not be out of the question. So I think it's doubtful that mass take-up of flying vehicles will be seen in the coming decade. And that again is due to the energy question rather than legislative will or anything else. But what is going to power our cars? Can we allow past decisions on fossil fuel use to determine future energy patterns? Our levels of material consumption have exceeded the planet's capacity to sustain them. And the scientists tell us we are running at a biocapacity of about 1.3. That's my segue into the question of electrochemical energy storage, which along with electric vehicles, battery capacity is of course projected to grow. In the International Energy Authority's stated policies scenario, which is not a forecast but an assessment of political announcements, the global electric vehicle battery capacity increases from around 170 gigawatt hours per year now to about 1.5 terawatt hours per year in 2030. And in terms of materials, that means the current demand of around 20,000 tons of lithium will grow to around 200,000 tons of lithium per year. And whether the planet can support that or not is unknown. In the IEA Sustainable Development Scenario, a forecast demand of 3 terawatt hours capacity is projected, with electric cars accounting for 85% of the battery market over the next decade. And the corresponding material demand, again, taking us into unknown territory. With predictions that the network capacity to charge these vehicles is also questionable, the integration of distributed and renewable energies will certainly lead us into further development of disruptive technologies such as smart grids, capacity sharing, peer-to-peer and vehicle-to-grid trading, and let's not forget the contribution of energy-positive households. Interesting times. But when isn't it? We can do it. But as Darwin predicted, we will have to adapt to survive. So how much energy is needed? We once relied on our understanding of current and historical demand to predict energy needs. And there's a growing realization that to balance consumption with future supply, energy use will have to decline, meaning our focus will need to shift from economic growth to meeting human needs. Life in a low energy environment will be very different. But the good news for our conference is the prediction that societies will have to become more locally focused with all that that entails. So what are we going to see in the next 10 years? Who knows? But whatever it is, it will be different. It will be environmentally challenged. social media governed, and artificial intelligence dominated in our world. When I was a kid, I dreamt about the freedoms a set of wheels would bring me, and I wonder what sort of wheels will carry the dreams of today's children. If indeed personal mobility by maglev or eVTOL AirPods will require any wheels at all. So thank you very much for your attention, and I would like to thank McKinsey, Ernst & Young and IEA for the reference material that has helped me develop this paper. I'm open to questions. Thank you.
Wow.
Wow.
Myself and Devon are sitting here in studio, and we're kind of blown away here. So thank you so much. I mean, it's a very difficult topic to try and predict the future of mobility, and I think 20 years ago it would have been an easy question. And I think as you've just alluded to, today it's one answer, tomorrow could be a completely different answer. And I think that's a really exciting but also a daunting world to kind of be in at the moment. So we got a couple of questions here. We got a couple ones that come through, and we're going to fire them and see what you say. So you're obviously from Australia, and I think Australia and South Africa share similarities in geography in that we have some urban areas in certain areas, and then we have vast distances that separate those urban areas. How do you see that impacting on the infrastructure solution for countries like Australia and South Africa? Because when you talk about the UK, they deploy 400 chargers and there's a charger every mile because the country is not that big. But in countries of vast, geographical sizes, how do you see that impacting on the primarily infrastructure rollout? What kind of impact do you think that has?
I think that's a very interesting question, Rob. And what we see is that in the eastern states of Australia, which are the more populated states, the infrastructure market has grasped that opportunity and put in recharging stations at major roadhouses where travellers can stop for a rest and a meal and just take some time to recharge themselves before continuing their journey. And certainly the experience of the Tesla owners is that they can drive from Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne and back on the major highways without too much dramas. Although what we're finding now is that because those the market share of those vehicles is putting a greater load on the physical infrastructure that's there. A lot of small towns are showing that they've come into the 21st, 22nd century by putting some EV charging bays behind a supermarket or something. But I don't really see that does a lot, because there's all this fuss around what connectors there are and things like that. So that's very much in its infancy. I do wonder whether anxiety about travelling long distances is really a barrier to EV take-up. A friend of mine has a Kona. He's got a range of about 250 k's, and that's well within anything that he wants to do on a domestic basis. And the great news there is he also has a dedicated PV charging system on his garage for that car. I always used to say, in fact, I still believe that the average Australian he wants the grunt of a vehicle that's going to tow the boat that he hopes to buy one day that he doesn't actually have at the moment, and he wants to load up his whole family and a dog and drive from Sydney all the way across 4,000 kilometres to see relatives that he hasn't spoken to for 20 years. And he also wants to drive up the mountain he doesn't live near.
Very similar to what we have here in South Africa.
All of those things that people think they want to do but don't actually do.
Yeah.
And if the industry can educate people, look, here's a car for your everyday needs. And many years ago, we we were talking about promoting electric vehicles by saying, buy one of these, and there's a picture of the little urban EV, and get one of these, there's a fancy sports car, and one of these, which was the big SUV, for free. And the deal was that if you signed up for the EV, you got vouchers for the vehicle rental to have one weekend a year. You could have the fancy sports car, and another weekend a year you could have the SUV. But I think that may be an interim solution, that it's not one size fits all. And if you do want to make a 2,000-3,000 kilometre trip through the outback, you rent a vehicle that's suitable for that purpose. People in town really don't need Land Cruisers, nice though they are. I can say it's not a problem for me because it's 3 kilometres to the front gate, and then it's another 100 kilometres to town. But the notion that you need the urban hardware to take the kids to school is a myth, and I think the industry can play its part in educating the consumers about those realities.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Devon,
Wow.
you got some hot topics there, I'm sure.
Yeah. Chris, nice to meet you face to face. Much respect. I just want to pick on your wisdom, please. We have a very strong automotive industry in this country, as you well know. And there's tens of thousands of jobs involved. And up to now, we've been building ICE cars, and very successfully. So we've got a strong set of skills, but ultimately, to save ourselves for the future, we need to now adapt. In your opinion, please advise us on next steps to all our local OEMs. How do you see us moving forward as an industry? How do we protect these jobs? How do we somehow adapt to live in the new world?
Well, I think that's a very good question, Devon. And I think if your OEMs approach that with an open mind to grasp opportunities rather than problems, those opportunities will arrive. There's a couple of things there. We in our country now are worrying about the coal miners' jobs. In Ireland, they worried about the peat diggers' jobs. In England, they worried about the people that went round. What's going to happen to the people whose job it is to go and light the gas lamps in the street every night? Things change, things evolve, and there are different ways of doing things. Now, in terms of your mobility and your automotive people, I don't know what your regulatory environment is like. I know what it's like in Australia, and we can't currently do it, but the idea of small, lightweight cars that are very cheap to build and very easy to put together. We did a paper at a conference back in the 90s about plastic electric cars are not dangerous, because they're not. They're dangerous only if they're sharing the road with huge vehicles, and that the Dutch experience is that they've got dedicated spaces where huge vehicles aren't allowed. Only the little urban mobility pods, if you like, are allowed. But in Amsterdam, it's between the canals, for example. So this doesn't answer the question for the rural people, but the rural people can also accept that, like, if I want to go to the store, the nearest store to me is about 15 kilometres away, a 30k round trip. So a small urban vehicle is absolutely fine to do that. We could churn them out by the lots of them. The issue will come, as I mentioned in my presentation, is where the materials for the exotic materials for batteries and control systems might come. But I think there's with change comes opportunity, and I think we need to grasp those opportunities and see where innovation can come and what services can be provided to keep those people employed. Otherwise,
wonderful.
we'll go back to looking after the horses again.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
we go back to the cart and horse age. And Chris, I have the pleasure of knowing you quite well. I've met you once or twice in person. I know where I'm going to ask you now is a passion of yours, and I think somebody's just put it in because they've seen your title. How do you see solar in countries like South Africa and Australia being part of the electric vehicle mix? I mean, we've got companies like Lightyear One, which was developed from the World Solar Challenge, which you obviously are very close to. And that's been developed in Europe, where they don't have as many sunny days as we have in Australia and South Africa. Do you see that solar could potentially be an answer to this range problem of big countries where maybe your battery gives you 400 or 500 Ks, but it's supplemented by solar cells, which can give you an extra 150 Ks? Do you see that kind of technology coming into play in a big way soon?
I certainly see that as a component of the mix, and it's not just as a range extender, because if you're driving in remote areas and you're not looking for a charging station as such, you're looking for somewhere to pull over and have a rest and make yourself a cup of coffee or something, and while you're sitting in the sunshine, your car is charging. So there's great opportunities around that. I've got an electric vehicle here on the farm that never sees, notwithstanding that my whole property here is off grid, that vehicle never sees any external charging other than some PV on the roof of the barn where it lives. And whenever I need that, I just go get it, drive it, put it back. So it's certainly got lots of opportunities, and what the kids are doing with the World Solar Challenge is pursuing the ultimate efficiency in electric vehicle operations. And in fact, the extended goal for the cruiser class is to do 1,000 kilometres without looking for a charging point. And the fact that we had one team actually do that
Wow.
shows that it's possible. Other people said, "Oh, it's all very well they did it, but we can't build a better car," because we never said any of this was easy. You come to the World Solar Challenge because it's the most difficult of its genre.
Fantastic.
Wow.
Well, and I think we're going to switch gears here because Devon's going to throw a different kind of option at you here.
Chris, we all know that the EV is the next step, is the next big thing. But I just want to pick your brain, please, on the next big thing. What are your thoughts on hydrogen? When do you think it's going to start becoming a little bit more popular and market ready? Thank you.
I think the hydrogen economy is going to grow with fuel cells for heavy transport. When we go looking for efficient electric vehicles, we're trying to cut down on weight all the time, and we're managing to do that with new materials, particularly. And of course, that's not the same for the heavy vehicle market that needs to haul heavy loads around the place. And I think hydrogen is going to have a big part to play in electrifying the commercial vehicle fleet.
Fantastic.
Oh, brilliant.
And I think that's a good answer, because I think that people are trying to find one thing to fit all modes of transport, all modes of mobility, and I think we need to maybe realize is that we move past that, where the ICE internal combustion engine did fit all modes, from big transport to small vehicles to sports cars. We might end up in a mix where there'll be different things that do different solutions, which I think is where you're getting to here, Chris, is where we're going to have the future of mobility won't be one standard answer. You may end up with an electric car and a hydrogen car. An electric car is supplemented by the sun. So the future is going to be broad and very, very different. With that in mind, I have a great question here that's just come through on Zoom. And the gentleman says, EV discussion aside, will car ownership even exist in 15 to 20 years' time? Surely as needs or usage model will prevail. If you need an SUV, you rent an SUV. If you need a truck, rent a truck. Obviously talking about, I'm assuming kind of car sharing models that we see coming around. What is your thoughts on that? Is actually vehicle ownership even going to exist in 15 to 20 years' time?
No, I think that's an excellent question, Rob, because I alluded to that in my presentation.
Yeah.
That the whole model of personal vehicle ownership is under threat. Why would you do that? And there's many scenarios that could come out of that, and alternatives. And we talked about not being one size fits all. So why would you have one vehicle, which is going to be far too big for everyday needs, but not big enough for occasional weekend needs, and sort of sit somewhere in the middle for the rest of its life? But that's a waste of resources. It's going to be too heavy on fuel, whatever that fuel is, and for lots of reasons, it's not going to fit. It's not going to be fit for the purpose that you're putting it to on any given day. And I think for that reason, we may well see in 10, 15, 20 years, a whole move away from personal vehicle ownership, where we're talking about mobility on demand, and perhaps paying cost per kilometre as a commodity. And nothing to do with what it is, the wheels that are carrying it.
Fantastic. Well, I think that really helps answer a lot of our questions, and I see there's a lot more kind of comments coming through, Chris. And I think what you've shared with us is maybe not so much of a crystal ball, but you've shared with us maybe 3 or 4 crystal balls and said, this is what it could look like. No one knows the answer. And this is what we may be looking forward to. And I think that really helps, is to have someone like yourself who's been involved in mobility and the future of mobility for the last nearly 30 years. You've seen it all. You've heard all the talk. As you said, you've had the media hype. The media like to spin things in a way. And I think it's very insightful for us here in South Africa to hear from someone like yourself. So if I can spring one last question on you, and this is maybe the 60-second elevator pitch. You know South Africa, you've been here a few times, you know the love for the country that we have. I know the love for the country that you have.
My son lives there.
Exactly. You've even told me that our wines are better than Australian wines, so this is great. I know.
That might have been a misunderstanding.
Our cricket team's better.
Our cricket team, 100% rugby, wine, we're just winning here.
I am embarrassed by our cricket.
So if we said to you, Chris Selwood, you can do one thing, not anything, you can do one thing, whatever you'd like it to be. You can change one thing to speed up the adoption of EV vehicles in South Africa. What would you as Chris Selwood do, one thing?
I think the biggest thing that you could do is embrace a manufacturer and have low-cost EV rentals as demonstrators widely available, so that people can get out of their head the prejudices that they've grown up with around some of the early adopters that were very limited on range. Change the mindset somehow through education that we don't. I noticed Tesla the other day had advertised, this new car will do 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 3 seconds. Whoopie-doo, buy a new set of tyres every month, why don't we? We don't need to do that. We need to learn to live more lightly on the earth. And I think EVs have got a part to play in that.
Fantastic. And I think that's a great thing we haven't heard, is that people get out their heads, have local cars that people can test drive. Yes. Because, again, you can't expect someone to go and just drop all their hard-earned money on something that they may think will do their job. Is actually let them experience it and let them believe that it can do their job. And that's just great. I hadn't even thought about that.
Same here.
So,
thanks, Chris.
Yeah, Chris, we're fast running out of time here, but I would just like to thank you from myself and Devon here in studio. Thank you for taking the time out of your afternoon in Australia on this Tuesday, sharing your insights and your knowledge with us. I think you've left us with a lot to think about, as well as a lot of food for thought, and that final thought about how we can change and how we can speed up adoption of EVs. I think that's a very practical solution from someone. So thank you so much from myself and Devon.
Yes.
Rob, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's always great engaging with intellectually interesting people, because it always sharpens your own mind around these things. So thank you very much. I'm pleased I've been able to make a meaningful contribution to you today.
Absolutely.
And we look forward to the next topic. opportunity for getting together.
Awesome. Chris, from all of us here in South Africa, have a great afternoon, sir, and thank you for joining us. So, what a conversation!
Wow.
I mean, here we've just been talking about EVs, and we have an electric vehicle, and what Chris has actually challenged us is to think about EVs and have different things, have different, you might have a different vehicle for a different solution, and I love what he touched on, because I think it's as much as we don't like to know that we're like the Australians, we're similar in South Africa. We wanted the vehicle that can drive to Cape Town, go over the mountain, tow the boat, go hunting, drive to Botswana. Maybe that one time I want to cross the Kalahari, it also needs to do that. Maybe it's time for us to realize that we don't need that. Yes. And when we need that for the one trip we're going to the Kalahari, we go and hire a vehicle that can do that. And I think that's a really refreshing mindset, Ivan.
Yes, absolutely. And also looking to the future. There's so much potential with hydrogen, and I'm not too sure what the byproducts are, and maybe then there's even more benefits. So all these new technologies, all these new ways of thinking, we have to explore them.
100%. And I think it's people like Chris Selwood who's sharing these kind of wide ideas, these big thoughts that can really allow us to maybe every now and again we need to look up, and we need to realize there are opportunities. And I mean, one thing to change. What a great idea! Local manufacturer, and allow people to have an EV for a week, experience it, so they so that you can, when they want to make the buying decision, they made it from an educator point of view. Absolutely. And I think it's an absolutely phenomenal question. Absolutely. So what a way to start day 2.
Great, really, and call it an extended test drive.
Yeah.
So you hire a car, you get a feel of it, you get an idea of what it's about.
Yeah.
And that's how you get the
feel of it.
Get the feel of it.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, he spoke about briefly there about car ownership and how that model is probably going to change. I think everyone knows that maybe my kids, your kids, when they get to the age of having a car, it won't so much be about owning their first car. It'll be a car sharing model or a usage model. I think that's also really exciting, and it shows unique opportunities for countries like South Africa and Australia. And I saw one of our Zoom comments was saying exactly what we were talking about earlier. European and smaller countries, which are geographically smaller, they can drop 500 chargers, and it makes a huge difference, because then there's a charger everywhere.
Yeah.
Countries are the size of South Africa and Australia. You drop 500 chargers and you only touch the urban areas. So we've got different challenges that we have to appreciate and understand, but also different opportunities. I mean, how nice is it what he spoke about? You could pull over, have a cup of coffee, and your car could charge itself based on solar cells. Yes. I mean, that technology is exciting. So what a great way to finish, to start day 2, I should say. Now we welcome a local gentleman who I think is going to bring up the energy in the studio.
Yes.
We had the pleasure of having Mr. Nhlanhla Mazibuko, who is the founder of Mazibuko Motor Company, which in itself sounds exciting.
Yes.
Talk about local manufacturers. There sounds like there's a hint coming here. And Nhlanhla is going to be talking to us about the 4th Industrial Revolution and the EV opportunities come along with it. And I believe that's going to be super exciting. I mean, it's something that our president has talked a lot about. Every corporate in South Africa has talked about 4IDR, and to have somebody local who's going to be talking about it, and the founder of Mazibuko Motor Company, that sounds like something I need to listen to.
This sounds big.
Sounds important.
I'm very excited, and also I hope it's the sign for the future.
Yep.
There's many more companies just like this, and we get the innovation and the creativity flowing.
100%.
That's where the opportunity is. So.
Fantastic. So we're going to be back in 2 minutes' time. Nhlanhla's just getting settled. So if you're watching us on Zoom, if you're watching us Facebook, YouTube, we're going to have 2 minutes. Go grab yourself a cup of coffee. But believe you me, you do not want to miss this talk now in 2 minutes' time. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you in 2 minutes.